Hello, welcome to another fresh edition of Focus On. I'm David Alabi. It's the season for annual forecast, and on this particular episode, we'll throw some spotlight on the launch of Emerging Africa's second edition of its Africa Capital Markets Outlook. But first, a review of macroeconomic dynamics that shaped Africa's capital markets performance in the year 2022, from the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war to policy tightening to reigning inflation.
In Nigeria in particular, we would notice that we are really not self-sufficient when it comes to agricultural products, and also being the largest oil producer in Africa, we are yet to meet that target of self-producing what we consume in the country, and this resulted into a big shock to the country. Also, looking at Ghana, Ghana is a country that is import dependent. And as a result of the import dependence, we saw that inflation started spiking in Ghana. And as of December 2022, inflation in Ghana touched 54%. And also we saw a lot of fiscal issues, from rising cost of debt to Ghana defaulting on debt payments, and inflation spiking, the cedi crashing against the US dollars. Same way in Southern Africa. When we look at South Africa also, the country was also affected by the issues that happened in the global economy. And inflation also increased in South Africa, same as Botswana.
In 2022, venture capital funding reached a record of $3.1 billion, an increase by 35% compared to 2021, which we believe is a positive for the African continent. And the number of deals to African startups also rose slightly to 570 compared to 541 recorded in 2021. Early stage deals decreased while late stage deals increased year on year. African startups accounted for about 1% of the global venture funding, while African fintech funding amounted to 1.46% of the global fintech funding. By the end of 2022, Africa had about 5 unicorns out of the 1 unicorn added during the year. So in terms of outlook at this point, we understand that inflation is a major factor to capital market transactions, and we understand that because of the recession as projected by the IMF and mentioned by my colleague earlier, that investors are going to want to take that into consideration. And we foresee that for the first half of 2023, the economic factors that contributed to the performance in the last quarter of 2022 would still be prevalent. So we foresee something similar for the first half of 2023 with mixed factors. We also expect that inflationary threats would help to see an end in the high rates regime, and as a result, we expect an extremely strong acceleration of deals in H2 2022 across stages, with more of it seen at an early stage level. So due to the rising presence of fintech startups in Africa, we're likely to see further increase in funding with respect to that sector of the economy going into 2023, as well as Asian startups.
Africa's capital markets are poised to be more resilient in the year 2023, despite forecasts of a global recession. Now, Emerging Africa believes it is time to de-risk the opportunities that abound, and its country-specific analysis covering 9 major capital markets across the continent explores trends expected across the primary capital markets to the bond markets, the FX segment, development finance, ESGs, and beyond.
Additionally, we highlight in this report investment opportunities for current and prospective stakeholders. As Africa has now almost fully recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, the world is approaching another recession, witnessing geopolitical upheaval, supply chain disruptions, high inflation, and high interest rate environments across nations. Despite this, access to capital markets is vital for economic and industrial growth, making countries less dependent on donor aid and loans from foreign governments to finance investments and expenditure. African capital markets activities picked up significantly in 2022 And indeed, our markets across Africa are poised to do even better in 2023, creating opportunities and attractive returns for investors in the process. One of the facts that has been emerging, including from a recent report by the Africa Development Bank, is that African capital markets or African markets and African economies have actually weathered the post-pandemic and the post-Russian invasion of Ukraine better than most markets across the world. One of the concerns that we have heard over the years as we interacted with investors and potential investors, the complaint has always been the fragmentation of the continent, the difficulty in finding partners, single partners, which is their model everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, they look at the market, they find partners that can lead them into the market. But that with Africa, they find they have to replicate these relationships across 54 to 55 countries. And emerging Africa is positioning itself as a partner that essentially can shine the lights on the opportunities across the continent and eliminate the need to do that, because sitting here or headquartered here in the largest market in Africa, the largest economy, the largest population, we think it gives us ample opportunity to guide and help international investors across the market.
So here we covered 9 countries across the African continent, and we deliberately picked countries in the different regions so Africa is equally represented. From West Africa, we picked Nigeria and Ghana. North Africa, Egypt and Morocco. East Africa, Kenya and Uganda. Southern Africa, Botswana and South Africa. And then the Indian Ocean region, Mauritius. The key takeaway here is the report is supposed to guide investment decision makings for the different players, both within the capital markets and even outside the capital markets. Be you an individual or an organization, this report would be an essential guide to helping you take decisions and understand the African capital market space.
A reference to the World Bank report that says African markets are relatively small and illiquid. Of course, there's low retail participation, there's poor governance and weak regulatory framework, of course, undeveloped infrastructure and limited breadth because they are dominated by few sectors. So now for me, these are challenges, but they equally represent opportunities. Take for example, and this is what I picked out from the report. If you talk about infrastructure, inadequacy, it is not developed, it's underdeveloped in African capital markets. To me, that points also to opportunities for those who can invest in developing that infrastructure. So that is one strong message that I picked up from this report in evaluating this particular chapter. And so such opportunities directly pointed out also include infrastructure development, real estate, financial services, technology and innovation, natural resources, agriculture, private equity, consumer goods and services, renewable energy, very important and very, very key to the future of not only Africa, but the world we live in today. Then impact investing, and of course looking at frontier markets. For me, the challenges are pointers for both policymakers and also for prospective investors.
I also think that it's complementary to a lot of work that's happening in private markets. So this speaks, I'm assuming, to public markets and a lot of work happening on the private market side. But all in all, I think they sort of aggregate together to ensure that we have markets that are liquid, public-private. We have companies and entrepreneurs that are provided platforms for raising capital, and therefore, a document like this, I think, is certainly extremely useful.
The Africa Exchange Linkage Project also comes under focus, highlighting the impact of integration of African stock exchanges, improving liquidity and increasing regulatory oversight functions.
And it gives insight as to the readiness of Africa to integrate and create a more robust market. And so if you look at the markets that are in there, we have about 8 markets now that have signed up: Nigeria, JSC, Nairobi, Egypt, Morocco, that's the Casablanca, Botswana, Ghana, as well as Nairobi. And so investors can now invest across these markets because the technology to do so is now available. The other elements around settlement is basically what the NGS is now working on with the AFRENSIM, to be able to allow investors to trade in their currencies without having to dollarize their investment. And I think that would really help improve liquidity. The other aspect of the report is really around trying to create products for investors. If you look at the markets, retail investor participation remains really muted across the continent. So where we do not have significant institutional investors from offshore, then the markets begin to struggle. And so this paper talks around products that the retail investors can invest in, usually around the asset management in terms of the sort of products that they can invest in. And ESG is one of those subjects that is really gaining momentum across the continent. And we're really delighted to have a detailed report around this. And so asset managers can begin to look at products for sustainability that retail investors can begin to invest in. And interestingly, the institutional investor side, if you look at Nigeria, where the pension fund themselves, the major institutional investor, has close to $30 billion under management. The challenge there is really finding products around sustainability and Islamic finance. And I think that with this kind of information in the report, issuers should be able to take advantage and begin to create products that investors can really invest in.
Now, Emerging Africa Group has its sight fixed to launching its first venture capital fund and will raise $100 million this year.
We're looking forward to the launch of our first venture capital fund, which is a technology fund, and it's an Africa-wide fund. And so this is a fund that will be investing across Africa. So obviously, releasing a report like this ahead of that is very helpful, both to our internal analysts and to the potential investors that we're going to be talking to as we share pipeline with them. For the technology fund, we're looking to raise $50 million by final close. And for our next fund, which will be a women entrepreneurs fund, we're looking to raise another $50 million. So on the whole, $100 million, which we will close in tranches.
On that note, this brings us to the end of this focus on the launch of Emerging Africa's capital market outlook for the year 2023. Thank you so much for watching, and bye for now. I'm David Alabi.